Well, now I'm happy to introduce our speaker for the day, Véronique Derougy. Je m'appelle Michel. An expert on economic and budget issues, and she's going to talk with us today about why women should be demanding less government in our lives. Véronique is currently a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. She was previously a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a policy analyst at the Cato Institute, and a research fellow at the Atlas Economic Research Foundation. Her primary research interests include the federal budget, homeland security, taxation, tax competition, and financial privacy issues. She writes a column for Reason magazine and is a regular contributor to The American, AEI's online magazine. She also blogs at The Corner, at National Review Online, and at Big Government. She's the co-author of Action, Taxation, is that it? OU. Means
yeah,
or.
Which means or.
Okay. This is a little French refresher today. Published in Switzerland in 1996. And she's the editor of the Mercatus Center publication series, Mercatus on Policy. She's currently on the board of directors of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. She received her master's degree and her PhD in economics from the University of Paris. She has 2 children. She lives in Arlington, and when I asked her hobby, she said, fighting for freedom. Please join me in welcoming Véronique.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see you. Bridget, I don't get to see you as often. I remember when I moved to the U.S., actually before I moved to the U.S., I met Bridget, and that was like 14 years ago. But yeah, a long time ago, and I was thinking, wow, I want to be that woman. And it seemed like a dream, I would come. I remember, excuse the digression, but I don't see Bridget that often. So I remember there was a Montpellier Society organized by Heritage. That was before I came to the U.S., and Heritage looked like, kind of the holy ground of anything when you're a libertarian stuck in France. Not that, Heritage is super libertarian, but at least it's so free market compared to anything I was exposed to. So it's a pleasure to be here. So, as you know, March is Women's History Month, right? And did you know that? Yes. So as school teacher, are going to be teaching our kids, or the kids of America, how women have fought for their freedom and have won the right to vote and fought for the right to own property, right? One important message is going to be utterly neglected and hence lost, is the fact that the government intervenes a great amount in women's life and ends up hurting them, or at the very least influencing in important ways the way they choose to live their lives. So you'll say, well, or at least we hear that, it's for their own good, right? And yeah, sometimes it is. However, remember that the road to hell is paved with good intention, and this is really clearly one of those instances. So in the past, women have suffered because the states didn't actually treat them equally as men. It was either, and I'm going to try to say that word probably out of a sense of chivalry. I've tried to practice it in the car like 3 times. Chivalry or like outright misogyny. I mean, we can think of things like the fact that assault wasn't really an assault when men would rape and beat their wives, right? And these are the type of things that actually pushed and encouraged women to actually fight for their freedom. Yet today, there are many of government policies, while they have the veneer of gender neutrality, end up having a more important and negative impact on women's life. So the old discriminatory policies, right, they were way more transparent. It was kind of like women can't serve in the military. But as I said, today, I mean, a lot of the government policy while they look gender neutral, end up having a much more important negative impact on women's life. I would love to cover absolutely everything, but I won't be able to. So I'm just going to touch on 3 main areas and try not to yap for too long so we can actually have a conversation. But the 3 areas I'm going to touch on are tax policies, regulation, and then entitlement. And obviously entitlement is a little of both, but I mean I'm going to actually focus on entitlement specifically because of its impact on women's fight for their own freedom and independence, but also because of the fundamental implication that it has through the impact it may have on our future and the future of our children. So let's start with tax policy. One of the things that people don't really often realize, even when they actually live through it, is how the tax code heavily discriminates against women. Not all women necessarily, but so for instance, the tax code absolutely discriminates against women who are working. Here's a number. 70% of women who are married make less than their husbands, right? They're what economists called secondary earners, right? Well, these women who make significantly less see the salary that they earn taxed at the highest marginal rate of their husband's salary, right? So if you file jointly, right, it doesn't matter that you make a significantly small amount of money. Your tax rate is going to be significantly higher than a single woman, right, making the same amount just by the fact that you're married and you file jointly. This is called the marriage penalty, and it's actually quite punishing. Remember, 72% of women who are married and file jointly earn significantly less amount than their husbands. We know that the higher the marginal rates, the bigger the penalty. So economic data shows absolutely clearly that in times where marginal rates have actually gone down, a lot of married women have actually joined the labor force. When marginal rates have gone up, married women have actually stayed at home, right? Note that I'm not taking a position on whether women should stay at home or should work, whether they should be married or single. I'm just saying that a lot of the time, the tax laws and the way they're written actually end up being a driver in the choices that women make in how they lead their lives. And that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't, and especially in the 21st century, it really shouldn't be the case. So one lesson when you hear, no matter what you think about President Obama's demand for letting marginal rates expire, right, especially on top income earners, just remember that ultimately this could have a potentially big impact on the decision that millions of women who are married will make about whether it's worth it for them to work or not. I think that's an important thing that we don't think about too much. Another important point is it actually affects significantly the freedom that women have to work full-time or part-time. So you have these married women, right, who have the luxury, potentially, to not work because marginal tax rates are too high and it's not worth them earning this money, right? But it's not always the case for everyone. There are actually a lot of couples who will suffer from the marriage penalty, right? But they can't afford to stay at home. And yet, when you have surveys, you find out that actually 80% of working women say that they would rather work part-time because it would make their lives better, so for whatever reason, right? And yet 2/3 of women end up working full-time. So that is enough, and it's usually because that marriage penalty and the tax burden that it imposes even on your low salary means that you can't actually just afford to work part-time, right? Because remember, the marginal rates the higher the marginal rates, the bigger the penalty, but also the bigger the gap between your husband's salary and your own. So sometimes it's working full-time would make this gap significantly closer, but then working part-time puts you in the low-income working woman. So this is another thing that actually significantly, has an impact on the way women decide to work to live their lives. Another thing is, sometime, as I said, the road to hell is paved with good intention. As part of the 90s push to get a lot of single mother to work rather than depend on welfare, a very good thing, right? The government has put in place what is called the earned income tax credit. Sorry. It is a way to move away from cash dependency for low-income people, and in exchange, basically, it is a tax credit, a refundable tax credit. So you give an incentive for low-income single mother. I mean, it wasn't meant for single mother in particular, but for low-income mother to actually join the labor force by making the tax penalty, smaller, much smaller, right? So what the literature shows is that actually it has had as a main impact, it has driven a lot of single mothers to the workforce, right? But another impact that it's had, whether it's bad or good, I can't really say, obviously, but it's to actually significantly decrease the growth of labor, the rate of labor participation for married women. Again, I'm an economist. I won't be taking a stand on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? But what we've observed is that these type of incentive given or targeted for a certain class of women end up having significant impact on the way other type of women decide to live their lives. And that, I think, is a problem. And by the way, I'm only going to focus on these few examples, but this is a problem that you see throughout the tax code. And why? Whether you're a woman, whether you're a renter, whether you're a homeowner, whether you have children or no children, we should absolutely be against all loopholes, flat, base, low rate. It's because there is absolutely no reason for the government to decide what kind of behavior should be encouraged and what kind of behavior should be discouraged, because no one should decide, right? So that's for the type of penalty and decision that women make that are influenced by the tax code. The tax code and the level of rates, of marginal rates that we face are actually have also a gigantic influence on women who own businesses. So 40% of privately held firms are headed by women, right? These are firms, they're teeny bitty ones, right? It's like a lot of firms that have fewer than 9 employees. They're teeny bitty ones. Where for most of these women, they file their business income under the personal income tax. So basically, when you have marginal rates that are really high, what you do is you penalize their business at a much, you get them to pay their business income at a much higher rate than most business face. If we believe, which I'm not necessarily a believer of this, but that small business are the engine of growth, I've actually written extensively against that. But anyway, that should kind of give you some pause, at least, So, high rates have tremendous impact on high marginal rates, tremendous impact on women in their personal life, the way they live their life, but also when they are business owners, right? Now I want to switch to regulation. Remember, a lot of the government policy usually have a goal to encourage some sort of behavior. So I gave you the example, right, of the earned income tax credit that were meant to encourage women to work, right? And the underlying assumption, which I find relatively outrageous personally, is this idea that government knows that if women are working, right, they're going to be more productive and they're going to be higher return for society. How they know that, I have no idea. But supposedly they know this. Of course, there's a complete confusion and totally lack of understanding about the fact that actually productivity comes in many forms, right? And it goes to what I was saying. It's like, who is to say that a woman should be married? Who is to say that a woman should be working? Who is to say that it's better for women to stay at home with their children? I mean, some conservatives make that claim. I don't think it's anyone's decision to make except the people who actually are living their own lives. So a lot of these policies, basically, they try to actually force women to do one thing or the other, right? And they totally so one of the things that's been observed over and over and over again is while the government has actually encouraged very successfully women to work, and especially single women to work, what is actually, we only have 24 hours in the day, and some of it, unfortunately, we have to use to sleep. When I say I'm going to do something more at work, the head of Mercatus always says, and I'll give you 4 more hours a day with that. And I was like, well, there's always sleeping. But anyway, so what economists have actually shown significantly is that the drive for women to work, while again, it's not really clear whether it is that significantly more productive for society, is had the main consequences of having significantly reduction in women's productivity at home, and in particular was taking care of their children and housework, right? So there's always trade-offs everywhere. But one thing, so what most of the literature concludes is that you can't really say, you cannot really respond and look at this data and say, definitely this was an improvement for society, especially in a kind of a global sense. What we know, however, is that women who are working and hence are in need of more help at work, right? They could significantly benefit from better immigration laws, from laws that would actually allow low-skilled workers, much more low-skilled workers, to enter the U.S. legally. And one of the things that you see is that there is a vast discrepancy between actually the demand for low-skilled workers, legal ones, right, that women would actually said they would highly benefit from, and the actual supply. And you can say that there's a lot of illegal immigrants. It's not actually true everywhere in the country, and it's not also a perfect substitute in any way, shape, or form. More importantly, allowing low-skilled workers to come legally in this country would be very beneficial for everyone, the people who employ them and the people who are illegal and who are, coming and have better lives because they are actually living a life above ground. So I think there's a lot of the things about immigration laws that could be changed to help women who are actually working and who would benefit tremendously from being able to hire people to help them at home. And so, for instance, if they didn't have to clean the house, maybe they could spend more time with their children whatsoever. I mean, there's a lot of things. Another big category of regulation that are hurting women is obviously workplace regulations. And a lot of them are actually pushed by feminists. Protection for maternity leave, equal pay, all of that type of thing that sounds good, like all rules that prevent and forbid discrimination against women, very often end up hurting them. So, for instance, economists have shown that states that have stricter maternity leave protections see real wage for every woman, not just the ones who actually have kids, fall dramatically, right? They also show that unemployment for women is higher in states with higher regulation, labor law regulations. And I can tell you, I come from a country that's, super well known for all the protection it does for women, and it's not a great thing. I mean, like if you're a young person under 25 in France or a woman, for many, many years, and obviously now it's going back up, your unemployment rate was above 25%. It's quite dramatic, right? So I think, and obviously the thing is like by trying to protect women who have children, women without children end up getting hurt. So why is this? I mean, why should we actually? Why, as women, should we be in favor of much, much fewer regulation, much, much more flexibility in the workplace, less rigidity of the labor market? It's because women are actually the ones that spend their time exiting the labor market. They also are the ones who are more likely to demand or to ask or to prefer, whatever better word is, to work part-time, right? So that's, so it is really, regulation in the workplace or over-regulation in the first place, even when it sounds as if it is meant to protect women, are actually quite devastating for women, and not just the women they're meant to protect, but also the women who have no intention of ever having children. But then now they're looked at as if one day they could potentially have children. And obviously two wrongs don't make a right. So then when you regulate by saying that you can never ask a woman whether she plans to have children, you make things, much worse. Now I want to end by talking about entitlement. Entitlement is really one of those issues that have not just obviously been presented as a way to protect women, but it has been presented as a way to help the weakest member of society. And sometimes it does serve that function, but very often it has actually really devastating, negative, and unintended consequences. This is a topic that I find actually particularly interesting, considering that women have fought for so long for their independence. And now that what you see is that women are the primary group in any countries that are dependent on government. So women are not necessarily dependent on their husbands, but they put themselves under the dependency of the government. So Social Security, for instance, when you look at Social Security data, 29% of senior women, so over 65, rely on Social Security for 90% of their income, right? When you look specifically at single women, that number jumps to almost 50%. So single women, 50% of single women over the age of 65 depend for 90% of their income on Social Security. People will say, well, that's great. This is why we need Social Security, right? It's because where would they be? What would they have done otherwise? Well, that, of course, totally ignores the fact that these women have been taxed their entire life at high rates. And it doesn't even take under consideration the fact that it's actually, for most women, it's actually a pretty bad deal. For most couples, actually, it is a pretty bad deal. Sorry. Medicare is a completely different issue because actually Medicare, you pay much, much less into the system than you get back. But Social Security is clearly one where if you're in the top 10%, you will get much less than you put in. But if you're in the 90% roughly, most of the time you will get what you put in the best case scenario. But that's like a terrible return on investment. And it's actually also ignoring what you could have done with that money. So imagine, first, obviously, when you're going to be taxed, it just destroys your incentive to take care of yourself and to actually save for yourself. Right, and but imagine what you could have done, the benefits of actually having had that money to save for yourself, not only could you have hope for probably higher return, and I mean, I think the data is pretty clear. It's harder to make the case when we come out of a big recession, but remember that the Dow is actually higher than it was now before the recession started in 2007, right? But also, think about what happens when you're a woman and you've paid a woman or a man, for that matter. I mean, everything I'm saying here, I mean, it works for men. And by the way, by men suffering from this thing, I mean, their family get hurt because if you had saved this money and you die, right, you could have left that money to your children. Or if suddenly you have an emergency, right, that money is you can tap into that money for emergency. With Social Security, not only have you paid into, but you can't leave it for your children. In many cases, you can leave it to your spouse, at least a smaller share of it. But you can't leave it to your children. You can't tap into it if you need to actually there's this great opportunity to send your children to some college, but that kid didn't get, a scholarship or whatever emergency, your roof blows, your house blows up, whatever have you can't use that money. So I actually think that this dependency, while on its face, kind of looks as if, what would these women do? I mean, there's actually a lot they could have done if they had not only the freedom, but also the incentive the knowledge that actually they had to do something and plan for themselves because there's no government program in the back. But it actually brings me to the final point I want to make about entitlement and Social Security in particular. This is a program that actually lawmakers, years after years after years after years, have misled people dramatically about the fact that they're entitled. And they're not entitled at all to this. First, Congress can change the laws anytime. So what happens when you actually are counting on this, and this is, in fact, your only source of income, like 90% of it was going to be, you are in trouble. But more importantly, there are people there are women and men who actually are really poor and actually could really use that money. Well, since last year, the Social Security is running a cash flow deficit. What it means is that the taxes collected on current workers to pay for current retirees is not enough to actually pay all of the benefits. So what happens is, in theory, you go and tap and get those assets that are in the Social Security Trust Fund. Except that this money isn't there anymore, right? I mean, they are real assets, but they are IOUs. The only way for the program to collect this money is for the federal government to either tax us again or borrow money. This built into our debt, and this is a way that we kick the can down the road. Unfortunately, the road is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. So my kids, I know, if we don't change track, will have no shot at the American dream, right? Not to mention how bitter I am that I've moved here, right, under the promise. But more importantly, think about these people. What happens, right? Let's even imagine that there are no consequences for the federal government to keep on borrowing money, to pay back the Social Security program, to kind of fill this gap between the amount of taxes paid and the benefits paid every year. What happens when all the IOUs in the trust funds are gone? Well, what the IOUs are, they're basically a budget authority. It's basically the permission for the program to spend a certain amount. When that money is gone, which is scheduled to be in like 2035, but we know it's going to be way sooner than this, automatically the spending on the program will be cut by at least 25%. I mean, and who do you think will pay the biggest price? it's going to be actually these people who are highly dependent on it. These seniors who are right now depending, and 90% of their current income depends on Social Security. So whether you want to do it because you would have a better life by saving your own money, or because you want to actually protect people who truly need government's help, Social Security creates the worst type of incentive. And as I said, the people who are the most likely to suffer from whatever the consequences that we face with Social Security are women, because they are the group who are the most dependent on these programs. Now, are women freer today than they used to be? Yes, they definitely are. It is a better world. You can work, choose where you want to work. You can get dressed the way you want to get dressed, for better or worse. Believe me. You can decide what kind of jobs. There are jobs who are not off limit for you. You can vote. There's all these things that you can do. You can be single. You can be married. You can be divorced. Again, I'm not favoring one particular activity over the other. So women are way better off than they used to be. And why is it? It's because we've gained so much freedom in the private sphere. Sometimes the government has encouraged this. However, there is so much now of our freedom that's hindered just and only because of government intervention that I actually think it is really time for women to push against this. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really an excellent discussion. You have a little bit of time for Q&A?
Sure.
Okay, we've got 2 mics here. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name and your affiliation again. If you're a student, tell what your college is. I saw one in the back there. Yeah.
Hi, Allison Miller, Heritage. Thank you for your talk. Regarding the marriage penalty, I have a poor memory of this, but it seems to me that during the Bush administration, some strides were made to at least mitigate the effects of the marriage penalty. So is it not as bad as it used to be?
It was what mitigated it. The main thing that mitigated it is the fact that the rates were cut, and that actually makes a significant difference. But it's still there. By the way, I have to say that conservatives are, I don't know what the right word is. They're not the bigger defender of actually the kind of freedom that I propose, because they tend to favor tax breaks for some groups. Like if you have children, you should benefit from tax credit. I think it's actually really the wrong way to go.
I had a question about the gender gap.
The gender gap.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? In elections, we always hear about the gender gap, and one of the theories I've heard is that it's really a lifestyle gap, and that it's people that want to depend more on government, so they vote for the liberals and the Democrats. Do you have thoughts on that?
So I think there is a misconception that women always vote for more government. It's not my area of expertise. That being said, I was very surprised. I attended a briefing once by Gretchen Hamel at Public Notice, and I would encourage you to talk to them. They do a lot of polling, and one of the things that she said is actually there are a lot of conservative women out there, but it depends on. It doesn't necessarily break down to So there's when you break it down by different group and category, you find actually that there are way more conservative women than there are. The other thing one of the other thing that she showed, which I thought was pretty interesting, is the way women get their information, and I think that's a good lesson for us. It's like women who are working moms or working women, or not working women, they tend and it sounds very unliberated, but they tend to get their information secondhand through their husbands. And also, they don't read the Wall Street Journal. They read local papers. And so what I thought was actually really quite striking is, like, I thought, well, maybe we've kind of failed to actually kind of reach out to these women because we need to find a better way to actually reach out and deliver information to them, and we would actually find that there are way more women who are against government intervention in their lives.
Voting? How does that play out in voting?
Well, I think there are a lot of women who are actually independent, right? And they change their mind a lot, and they get annoyed. My own theory is, like, they're really libertarians, but they don't want to. They don't know it yet. They don't know it yet, but but I'm not a voting expert at all. But I actually think that while maybe the aggregate numbers tend to show, I actually think we should give women way more credit for the fact that they're not as government-driven. If only we could talk to them about the impact that all of this has on their children, right?
If only they could hear your talk.
Well,
Becky?
Yeah, I'd like to go back for a minute to your discussion about the earned income tax credit. Needless to say, I'm not for it, but I'd like to have you talk to us a little bit more about how you see this playing out in the real world if poor people, and we're talking about women today, but poor people are encouraged to work by virtue of the earned income tax credit being refundable rather than getting welfare. And they go into the workforce, which displaces jobs for other women who might want to work. Are you then saying that you'd rather have them get welfare?
No.
I mean, I know that
no,
would not be a libertarian
the system,
position to take,
no,
so I know that's not what you're saying, but explain to us what you're saying here.
So we had one system replace the other, right? These are not the only two alternatives that we have. We would be way better off having actually a system that doesn't discriminate against one type of, one choice other than the other, right? So my beef against the current tax code, and it's been like this forever, is the fact that it discriminates. So basically, it picks winners and losers, and it doesn't treat people equally. So the definition occurring to me of tax fairness should be that if you actually earn the same money, you should be taxed the same. Well, this is not the kind of things that you have right now. What you have is a system where basically the amount of taxes you pay are a product of whether you have kids, whether you own a house, which states you live in, whether you rent or you own, and all of these things. And I don't think that we should give special tax treatment to people with children. And so a better system to me would be one where you have, a flatter tax base with much lower rates. Remember, right now, a lot of the incentives given through these tax credits, they are to compensate for the fact that rates are pretty high, right? If you had much lower marginal rates, you wouldn't need to actually do all these spending through the tax code. No?
Follow up. This is good. So tell us then, wave your magic wand. You're the president for the day, and like Obama, you can do anything you want, and it doesn't matter what the Congress says. Tell us what your tax code would look like for the people in this room, and how would it pay for the government that we have.
Okay. No, that's the thing. So we got to live in the real world now. Yeah. But that's the thing that drives me nuts about all these Republicans right now talking about how they're going to cut, their tax rates and cut taxes and all this, but then they won't put forward dramatic reduction in spending. So I wouldn't put forward a tax plan that significantly reduced taxes, right, if it can't be matched with significant reduction in spending, because that's just like making the problem worse. So I'm president for one day. I changed the system, better get busy. Here is how I would conceive it. On the tax front, what I would like, so actually I would start by the spending. I would try to identify the type of thing that actually I think the government should absolutely provide. The federal government should provide, right? So some defense. Not necessarily as I'm a libertarian, as you said, so not as necessarily as, but I would like some defense, not necessarily some military. But again, I'm not a defense expert, so I know nothing about what I'm talking about. But so some defense, okay, and a safety net for people who are truly poor. That means we have a Medicare. Whether we change the system or not, we don't need a Medicare. We have Medicaid. We don't need a Medicare on top of this. I would want to change the system really to actually focus on delivering service for the people who are really poor, right? Change the system entirely. So identify the things that we think the government absolutely should deliver. That's the first step. In my book, you can do that spending easily half of what we're spending now. Now that you've identified how much money you need, that's the way the tax code should be, is the taxes should only be there to collect enough revenue to pay for the spending that's absolutely needed and necessary. And it shouldn't be there to actually encourage one type of activity over the other, and it should try to do the tax collection in a way that distorts the economy and economic activity the least. And that, to me, means absolutely a flat base with no exemption for some industry, for the manufacturer, for green energy, for children, for all of that stuff with a very low rate. Flat, ideally. If you can't sell it to Congress, maybe like 2 or 3 different rate from 15 to 18.
The Romney flat tax, 15%?
I do that, but then show me the spending cuts.
Yeah, now also the Romney tax is individuals, right? This is the personal flat tax.
Yeah.
Now you said nothing for manufacturing, nothing for green energy. Tell us what your corporate tax structure would look like.
I actually think we should get rid of the corporate income tax. I actually think capital should be taxed at 0 rate. We have like the most distortive system right now. Everyone focuses on how bad the rates are for corporations, but actually one of the most damaging aspects of the corporate income tax is the fact that we tax income on a worldwide basis. We're like one of 6 or 7 countries only in the OECD nation who do this, and the combo of both makes our system completely inefficient. And in the typical fashion, the way we try to compensate for this horribly punitive system is by actually saying, well, it's okay, you don't have to bring your income back, and then we'll allow you to compete abroad with your competitors and not be taxed twice on your income. But then, you have people saying, oh, look, corporations don't pay taxes. And so, but I mean, the economic theory is clear. I mean, first, corporations don't pay taxes. People do, and capital should be taxed at 0 rate. One of the things also that is basically unbelievably ignored, and thankfully there are a lot of economists that are bringing this to light now, is how taxes on corporations are actually extremely punishing for labor. So Aparna Mempour and Kevin Hassett have been doing tremendous work, and they're not the only ones at AEI, showing that the burden of the tax, the corporate income tax, is on labor paid in the form of significant lower rates. So I would get rid of all this.
Yes, no, this is very good. So zero corporate income tax, 15% on individuals on their earning, on their paycheck. How about if they get a dividend check? Grandma gets a dividend check.
No. Once it's been taxed once, you just don't touch it.
Folks, everyone, this is just earned income, 15%. Yeah. No mortgage deduction?
No.
No charitable deduction?
No.
I mean, how's the Heritage Foundation going to survive?
You'll be fine.
And which candidate is closest to that plan?
So I'm going to say something extremely shocking, but remember, I'm a hardcore libertarian. I've never voted in my entire life, and I don't think that will ever happen because no one comes anywhere close. But if I had to say someone who's actually, I don't agree with him. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but someone who I think has provided tremendous vitality to the debate has been Ron Paul. I mean, again, I think that the solution, like Ron Paul supporters are, they're interesting because they kind of like very lucid about government, except that they think that the simple fact of the election of Ron Paul will change the nature of government. I don't believe this. But so that's why, I spend so much of my, this is why I come off as a hack in the eyes of the left, is because my answer is always shrink the government. You want better oversight? Shrink the government. You'll have less to oversee. You want this, but so I believe that no one man will change things. The only thing that will change things is if we can get a much smaller government. Wow, see all this. By the way, so I can be a little controversial. There are many more other things that actually really penalize women. So feel free if you have your own example. If Robin is looking at me, she said, "Don't say the war on drugs."
Hi, Jean Barry, Heritage. Can you give us some examples of the government policies in France and their effects that you most wanted to move away from?
How many days do you have? Okay. I'll say it. I think the most devastating impact of government, and the thing that I ran away from, is that it actually has turned French people into complete. Trying to find a word that's actually not so pejorative that I can actually go back and visit if this comes. Basically, French people are just incapable of thinking inside of the box. They can't conceive of their lives without the government. They are brainwashed to a level that makes them absolutely unbearable. That's where I left. That's the first reason why I left, literally, because I was a PhD student, so I was totally living in my bubble. I didn't have to work. I was just like...
you didn't have to work because it was all paid by government?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was the only one in the econ department who actually had a job. I worked for IHS Europe. And people were like, "You work? Why?" But, I didn't have to actually... I worked for a libertarian organization, right? With all the problem that it brings. I'll say, but I didn't have to really actually put up with, and I was barely paid. So, but you really, this is, you can't. And granted, back then I was a wild, insane libertarian, right? Where I would so I wasn't super open-minded to other people's opinion. Oh, I'll say that. But you cannot understand how, what it's like to be around people who can't even just can't conceive of their lives without government intervention. It is quite spectacular. When I go back now, for years and years and years, you'll remember this, I refused to go back to France. And then with old age, I started going back and taking my children and realizing that if you don't have to work and if you're just a tourist, it's actually, it's a great country when you don't have to pay for all that stuff. But I am stunned. It's astonishing when I listen to the radio in France. They still have a communist party, right? And you listen to the debate between politicians and you think this is the Onion video. I kid you not. It is I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, it is, and you're listening, and you have the Sarkozy and who can't even respond to the moronic statements that are made about worker oppression and by the market, and it's just like, it's stunning. It is stunning, and national education will do that for you.
Okay, we'll do one more question, then we'll talk informally. You've got the mic. Yes.
I wanted to say that the Young Democrats video from last year that came out is a great example of how that's catching hold in America now, about how they're saying, government supports me, or like government is the thing that's supposed to take care of me. It was really disturbing. I couldn't sleep at night. But I actually have a question about the myth of the wage gap. I didn't know if you kind of buy into that, the myth of the wage gap.
Oh, yeah.
The myth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you kind of buy into that. Carrie Lucas wrote a great piece for Wall Street Journal last year about it, and it's I think it's really important for people to know that there is only a marginal
when you take under consideration the fact that women usually demand more flexible work hours, and they also will enter and leave the workforce. When I worked at Cato, I was the first female scholar ever to have a baby, so they didn't really know what to do with me. So I said I was going to take 3 months off, and they let me, right? At some point, David Bose was at my house, and he said, "Are you ever going to come back?" And I was just like, "Sure, I'll come back." And but so women, we do this. I leave Mercatus to go to the science fair. I go to the pediatrician. My kids had the stomach bug last week. I was at home pretending to work. And so women, that kind of responsibility falls on women more. And so when you take all this under consideration, the gap is actually barely existent. More importantly, while you've heard all the talks about the great stagnation and how the median income has not actually grown, it's grown for women, by the way. Women have seen the median wage for women has actually grown in the last, median income for men has not. So I think when you actually look at the data, you see that women are in good shape, and any attempt to change things or the way things are. I'm not saying there's no discrimination whatsoever, but the question is, can you do something productive about it? And usually the answer is no. So
I have a question also. So much of what you were talking about, and what Michelle, I think, was getting to a little bit on the gender gap, really stems from kind of a level of economic illiteracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Mercatus has looked at this a number of times and has really tried to direct some of their programs. For the people in the audience who are not economists and haven't had your training, what are one or two books that you would recommend that are written in layman's language that would be a great kind of introduction to some economic concepts? And who would be some bloggers besides yourself, which you should all bookmark at the corner, and because she uses charts really, really well. It's really great to see Veronique's blogs explaining some economic data points and then giving you the real story. The administration's told you one thing, this is what the data really actually shows. But who are some other bloggers, and what are just one or two books that you would recommend for a layman?
I would say, economics in one lesson. Henry Hazlitt's. I think this should be on everyone's reading list. Choice by James Buchanan is an amazing book. It's very small. It's a really, really, really great book. As for bloggers, there's just a huge amount. If you want to go the geek route, but it's always a really awesome route. Marginal Revolution, Tyler Cowen and Alex Haberock. They're GMU professors and they're really great. For more libertarian, unapologetic libertarian blog, go to reason.com, Hit and Run, and it's not. They will tell you how evil the government is, and they always have great pictures. there's so much product, Cato, obviously. I mean, on a purely economic policy, I think, your blog is doing a great. There's a whole sorts of Scott Sumner for the geek out of you, The Money Illusion, is really a great blog to read. It's much more geeky. It's like, he takes on a lot of the academic, but he's great. And by the way, I will make a plug for Scott Winship, who is at Brookings and who has the absolute best work on income mobility and inequality. He's a liberal, he's a progressive. He is under attack massively from people on his side because he's been the guy making the case that when you actually take into consideration shift of income, of reporting an income in 1986, income inequality in the U.S. is no different than the rest of the world, which means there is the 1%, certainly makes significantly more, but it's the same as in France, for instance. Hence, it means that the factors underneath this trend is something else than the evil rich benefiting from the evil tax code that we have. And he's also been a guy debunking the shrinkage of the middle class extremely well. So I would really, these are like must read. But economics and listen, Frédéric Bastiat, anything by Bastiat is just obviously great. I guess IWF on, but there's a huge amount of things out there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.